You know that split second when you realize you've stepped into a situation you can't quietly back out of? That was me last Thanksgiving. I had driven 3 hours to my sister's house in a foggy drizzle, already mentally exhausted from the week. The plan was simple: eat, smile, endure a few awkward questions about my love life, and drive home. Instead, I walked straight into the biggest family war our town has probably seen in a decade. The house itself was buzzing when I arrived, candles burning too brightly, the scent of roasted turkey mixing with a suspicious hint of whiskey in the air. My sister Hannah greeted me with a hug that was a bit too tight, like she was already holding back tears or rage. My brother-in-law Chris gave a curt nod from the couch, eyes fixed on the football game, but jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles twitch. I hadn't even taken off my coat and something already felt wrong. I tried small talk. Traffic was brutal, I said, hanging my scarf on the coat rack. Hannah just muttered, yeah, and went back to slicing sweet potatoes like they had personally insulted her. Chris's knuckles whitened around his beer can. My nephew Noah sat cross-legged on the floor playing with his Switch, the sound effects loud enough to be a warning siren. Then came the first crack. Chris muttered something under his breath, something about typical Hannah timing, and she froze mid-slice. Knife hovering, she turned slowly and said, "Do you want to say that louder, Chris?" Her voice was sugar-coated poison. I swear even the football commentators went silent for a second. The silence stretched like an elastic band about to snap. I stood by the door, coat half off, pretending I hadn't heard anything. Noah, oblivious, kept his Switch volume blasting like a tiny DJ of doom. Hannah placed the knife down with exaggerated care, wiped her hands on the towel, and faced Chris. "Go ahead," she said. "Explain to our guest why you think my typical timing is a problem." Chris finally tore his eyes from the screen. He had that look, half boredom, half fury, like a man who had rehearsed this fight in his head all morning. "I'm just saying," he began, "it must be nice to waltz in late to everything and expect everyone to wait around." His voice had that casual cruelty that hits harder than yelling. Hannah's cheeks flushed crimson. "Late, Chris, I was up at 6 roasting that turkey while you were sleeping off your beer. If anyone's late to anything in this house, it's you. Late to pick up Noah from school, late paying bills. Should I keep going?" I wanted to disappear. This wasn't the gentle sibling banter I was used to. This was years of resentment boiling over. Chris set his beer down with a thud that made the table shake. "At least when I'm late it's not because I'm too busy texting my ex." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Hannah's eyes widened, then narrowed into daggers. Even Noah looked up from his game. My stomach sank. I knew this was no longer about turkey. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Hannah's breathing grew sharp and uneven. "Excuse me," she finally said, each syllable clipped. "You want to repeat that in front of our child?" Chris leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low and cold. Maybe he should know what kind of mother he has. I felt like I'd walked onto a stage mid-play, no script, no exit. I began, but Hannah cut me off with a raised hand. "Don't," she whispered, eyes locked on Chris. "Not one more word from you." Noah's face twisted, confusion and fear mixing. "Mom?" he asked softly. Hannah crouched to his level, her voice suddenly gentle. "Sweetie, go upstairs and play in your room for a bit, okay?" Noah hesitated but obeyed, clutching his Switch like a lifeline. His small footsteps echoed up the stairs like distant warning drums. When the door upstairs clicked shut, Hannah stood, taller somehow. "You don't get to poison my child with your bitterness," she said. Her voice shook, not from weakness but from sheer restraint. Chris smirked, a dangerous, taunting smirk. "Bitterness? Maybe I'm just tired of pretending you're the perfect wife when everyone knows about your little lunch meetings." It felt like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The candles flickered, the house itself seemed to hold its breath. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just a family argument. This was an unraveling years in the making, and I was trapped right in the center of it. Hannah's face tightened as though every muscle had turned to stone. "You really want to do this, Chris, right now, in front of my brother?" Her voice was a low tremor, the kind that warns of an earthquake before it hits. I froze, my coat still hung halfway off my arm. Chris leaned back, that smirk never faltering. "Maybe it's time someone called you out. All these little client lunches you think I don't notice? Please." He waved a dismissive hand, like the very air between them was an insult. My stomach churned. I had no idea what client lunches meant, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. Hannah's eyes glistened, not tears yet, but close. I have worked every damn day to keep this family afloat while you gamble away our savings on your so-called investments, she hissed. You want to talk secrets? Let's talk about your offshore account. That shut him up. For a second, his smirk faltered, replaced by something darker, fear maybe. He blinked once slowly, like recalculating his next move. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. I found the emails, Hannah snapped. And the transfers. Do you think I wouldn't notice when thousands vanish overnight? Her words sliced through the air like broken glass. Chris opened his mouth, closed it, and reached for his beer instead. The can hissed when he cracked it open, louder than it should have been. The room pulsed with tension. Even the flickering candles seemed to lean closer, eager for the next blow. I considered slipping outside, pretending to take a phone call, anything to escape, but some morbid gravity pinned me to the spot. Chris took a slow sip, eyes fixed on Hannah. You're making a mountain out of nothing, he said finally. Those transfers were temporary. He emphasized the last word like it was a magic spell that would undo the damage. Hannah's laugh was brittle and sharp. Temporary? Chris, you moved $50,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands. That's not temporary, that's criminal. He slammed the beer down, foam spilling over the rim. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The market is. Don't you dare blame the market, she snapped, cutting him off. This isn't about stocks or crypto or whatever get-rich-quick fantasy you're chasing. This is about trust, and you broke it. I could feel my own pulse in my throat. Their words weren't just accusations, they were landmines. Each one revealing a darker layer beneath their suburban facade. The picture-perfect Thanksgiving I'd imagined had mutated into something raw and feral. And somehow, I knew we hadn't even reached the real explosion. Chris rubbed his temples, the first crack of exhaustion showing through the anger. You think you're perfect, he muttered, barely above a whisper. At least I'm not sneaking around with clients behind your back. Hannah's eyes narrowed to slits. My clients are actual clients, Chris. I have contracts, invoices, receipts. You have excuses and a trail of bad bets. She stepped closer, her voice a low growl. You want to air every secret tonight? Fine. Let's talk about the messages I found on your phone. Chris stiffened. The beer can in his hand wobbled slightly, a silent tell. Messages, he said too quickly. Yes, Hannah said, her tone slicing like a scalpel. Late-night texts from a number saved as Mike, except Mike sends you heart emojis and pictures no Mike would send. The color drained from Chris's face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time all evening, he looked small, like a man who just realized the floor beneath him was giving way. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of my own heartbeat hammering like a drum. Whatever secrets they'd been hiding, tonight they were all coming into the light, and there would be no putting them back in the dark. Chris's silence stretched so long I could hear the faint creak of the old house settling. Hannah didn't move. She simply stood there, arms crossed, a quiet storm building behind her eyes. Finally, Chris set the beer down with a slow, deliberate motion, as if any sudden movement might shatter what little control he still had. It's not what you think, he said, the words trembling on his tongue. Hannah raised an eyebrow, the tiniest flicker of a bitter smile touching her lips. Really? Then please enlighten me, because to me it looks exactly like what it seems. His shoulders slumped, a subtle surrender. It started as a joke, he said, barely above a whisper, a stupid group chat with some guys from work. Someone added, he stopped mid-sentence, eyes darting toward me as if realizing I was still in the room. Someone added a friend, things got messy. Messy, Hannah's voice cracked like a whip. Chris, those weren't locker room memes, those were pictures, intimate ones, and you replied. The air turned heavy, pressing down on me like a wet blanket. I felt like an intruder in a crime scene, watching a confession that could never be taken back. Chris rubbed his face with both hands, muffling a groan. It wasn't serious, he muttered. It meant nothing. Nothing, Hannah stepped forward, each footfall deliberate, like she was crossing a minefield she'd already mapped. Do you even hear yourself? You've lied about money, you've lied about people. And now you stand here and tell me it meant nothing. Chris's eyes flashed, a spark of defiance breaking through his exhaustion. You're acting like you're innocent. You think I don't know about the lunches, about your meetings that run 2 hours late. Hannah stopped short, her breath catching. You're deflecting, she said quietly. This isn't about me, this is about you. But Chris pressed on, his voice rising. I've seen the way you light up when that guy, what's his name, Derek, comes around. Don't pretend it's all business. Don't you dare. The accusation hung between them like a live wire. Hannah's face flushed deep red, but her eyes stayed locked on his. Derek, she said slowly, as if tasting the name. He's my client, a client who pays on time and respects boundaries. That's what real professionals do, Chris, something you wouldn't understand. Chris's fists clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening. For the first time that night, I wondered if this would turn physical. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it too. The tension cracked like a snapped bowstring. Chris turned abruptly and paced toward the window, the dark drizzle outside reflecting his shadow back at him. You always do this, he said, voice low, almost a growl. You make me feel like the villain while you play the saint. Hannah followed a step behind, her tone sharp but trembling. You don't need help feeling like the villain, Chris. You wrote that script yourself. He spun around, eyes wild. I lost everything trying to give us more, he barked. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch everyone else win while you sink? The rawness in his voice startled even me. Hannah blinked, taken aback. For a moment her anger softened into something almost like pity. Then why didn't you just tell me? She asked quietly. Why turn it into secrets and lies? Chris's chest heaved. Because every time I try, you look at me like this, like I'm already a failure. His voice cracked on the last word. The room went silent, except for the rain against the window. Hannah's shoulders sagged, her fury ebbing into weary sadness. Chris, she said, her voice barely audible, we could have faced it together. But now, she shook her head, eyes glistening, now I don't know if there's an us left to save. Chris's face twitched, as though her words were a physical blow. He turned back toward the rain-soaked window, his reflection a blur of shadow and glass. You think I wanted it to be like this? He said finally, his voice a hoarse whisper. Every night I stayed up staring at spreadsheets, watching numbers bleed red. I thought if I could fix it before you knew, maybe I'd finally be worth something. Hannah's lips parted, but no words came. For a few long seconds, the only sound was the steady tap of rain against the pane. I felt the room tilt, like the center of gravity had shifted from fury to something far more fragile. She finally stepped closer, her voice softer now. Chris, you don't have to prove your worth with a bank account, but you hid it, you lied. And then those messages, her voice faltered as if the weight of every betrayal pressed down at once. Chris turned, his eyes glassy. It was stupid, he admitted, all of it. The gambling, the chat. I wanted an escape, a distraction from the fact that I was losing. Hannah swallowed hard. And you thought risking our family was the way? Her words were quiet, but they cut deeper than any yell. Chris took a hesitant step toward her, but she raised a hand, stopping him mid-motion. The house seemed to shrink around us. Even the dim light of the candles flickered like they, too, were holding their breath. Chris let his hand drop and sat heavily on the edge of the couch, shoulders hunched, a man deflated. I thought I could fix it before you found out, he said again, voice cracking. I kept telling myself, one more trade, one more big win, and it'll all be okay. He rubbed his palms over his face, dragging down like he could peel the guilt off. Hannah sank into the armchair opposite, her posture rigid. Eyes trained on the man she once promised forever to. Do you realize, she said, her voice low but firm, that I spent months wondering why you felt so far away? I blamed myself. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong. Chris lifted his head, regret etched into every line of his face. It wasn't you, he said. It was me, terrified of being ordinary, terrified of failing you. Hannah exhaled, a trembling breath that carried both fury and sorrow. Chris, failure isn't losing money. Failure is hiding the truth and dragging everyone down with you. A hush fell over the room, a fragile quiet that felt like standing on thin ice. For the first time since I'd arrived, I realized how cold the house had become, the kind of cold that seeps into bone. Hannah clasped her hands in her lap, staring down at the floorboards. "You don't get to undo this with an apology," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Trust isn't a light switch you flick back on." Chris nodded slowly, as if each movement required effort. "I know," he whispered. I don't know how to fix it anymore." Her gaze lifted, eyes glistening but resolute. "Then start by not running," she said. "No more secrets. No more disappearing into numbers or distractions. If you want any chance at this family, you stay. You face the wreckage you made." Chris's breath shuddered out of him, a mix of fear and fragile hope. "I'll stay," he said quietly, like a vow meant more for himself than anyone else. In the heavy silence that followed, the storm outside began to ease, the rain softening into a mist. For a moment, it felt like the house itself was exhaling with us, still bruised, but no longer on the brink of breaking. The rain tapered off until the only sound was the slow drip of water from the gutters outside. I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Hannah rubbed her temples, the strain of the night settling into her posture like an extra weight. "Noah," she murmured, almost to herself. He heard more than I wanted him to. Chris looked up, guilt slicing through the weary lines of his face. "I'll talk to him," he said. "I'll explain." "No," Hannah interrupted firmly. "Not yet. He needs to see that we can have a normal morning first. He doesn't need every sordid detail dumped on him tonight." She glanced at me for the first time in what felt like hours. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this," she said, her voice a mix of shame and exhaustion. I shifted awkwardly. "Don't apologize," I said gently. "Families, they're complicated." It felt like a pathetic understatement, but it was all I had. Chris leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the rug as if it held the blueprint for redemption. "I'll call the bank tomorrow," he said finally. "We can see what's left, what can be recovered. I'll show you every statement. No more hiding." Hannah didn't answer, but the tiniest flicker of something, reluctant hope, maybe crossed her face. The night wore on. We sat in a fragile triangle of silence, the air heavy with things too big to name. Eventually, Hannah rose and began clearing the untouched plates from the table. The smell of cold turkey and half-melted candles hung in the air like ghosts of the evening we were supposed to have. Chris joined her without a word, taking dishes to the sink. The sight of them working side by side, silent, tentative, was almost surreal after the storm of accusations. I offered to help, but Hannah shook her head gently. "You've seen enough," she said. "Sit, rest." I watched as Chris rinsed plates, his movements slow and deliberate. At one point, their hands brushed while passing a dish, and for a split second neither pulled away. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, like a single fragile thread holding two frayed edges together. When the last dish was stacked and the counters wiped clean, Hannah finally turned to me. "There's a guest room upstairs," she said quietly. "It's late, stay the night." I nodded, suddenly aware of how heavy my eyelids had grown. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the night's events looping in my mind like a film I couldn't pause. Down the hall, I heard the faint murmur of voices, Hannah and Chris, too soft to make out the words. I thought about how quickly the night had unraveled, from the innocent clink of silverware to the kind of confessions that crack a marriage wide open. I wondered whether the quiet conversation in the other room was the beginning of a truce or simply the exhausted lull before the next storm. At some point, the murmurs faded. The house settled into the deep stillness of early morning, when even memories seemed to hold their breath. I closed my eyes, but sleep came only in fragments, each one haunted by the echo of their voices, accusations, regrets, the sharp edge of betrayal softened by the possibility of something still worth saving.